So, hello, Alicia. Thank you for coming on our podcast. We stumbled onto Alicia originally on Twitter, where we saw her advocating for courtyard urbanism, and we were really interested in that topic. So, if you could please tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Well, hello. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, so I started the Twitter account really in the summer of 2024, so not too long ago. And I started it because I had gotten involved in a local neighborhood group here in Chicago. I'm on the north side of Chicago. I live here with my husband, and we have three little kids and a dog in the city. And I had got involved in this neighborhood organization and in the Urban Planning and Development Committee. And we were trying to encourage or work with developers to bring more development that was working for families because we had noticed in our neighborhood that a lot of families were having to leave the city, not because they disliked urban living. The schools are great, they love the city. They did not want to move to the suburbs, but they ended up having to move because they couldn't find a large enough unit with some kind of yard access. And that's what everybody needs when they have little kids. They want like a 3 or 4 bedroom if they've got more than a couple kids and some kind of like yard. And I had it had struck me at the time that in Europe, they have a really great setup. And in my 20s, I had lived in Europe. I'd worked as an au pair for a family in Florence. And in Europe, they have what are called perimeter blocks or courtyard blocks. And basically, they have city blocks that are framed by small multifamily buildings. And so you'll have a multifamily building that is maybe 60 feet wide and goes up 4 to 6 stories. And there's a single stair. And so at each landing, there's only, 2 to 3, maybe 4 units. And they're built wall to wall. So they enclose the city block so that there's a kind of courtyard in the middle. And so every household has out the front of the door, like access to the city and the street and all the amenities and all the wonderful things that we like about a bustling, amenity-rich city. But out the back door, they have this protected, safe, green courtyard. And it struck me growing up there, this is just like the perfect way to raise a family in the city
Mhm.
because when the kids are little, like under 8, before they're too little to like, free range in the city, you could just send them out in this courtyard and there no strangers could get in, the kids couldn't get out. It was just like the best of both worlds. And then I just became kind of obsessed with why we don't build these in the United States.
Mhm.
And in Chicago, it's because we have alley blocks. And so instead of a beautiful courtyard, we have these disgusting alleys where we put all our garbage and we don't do wall-to-wall construction. We tend to have these long, we have what's called a two flat, and it's like a small multifamily, but we don't do them wall-to-wall. There are these side setbacks, and we also have front setbacks that kind of set the building back a little bit further than block. In New York City, I think one of the reasons why New York City is widely considered to be the best American city is that it is the closest to a perimeter block situation because you do have a lot of blocks where you have buildings that are wall to wall and that frame a block. And so you do have more of a protected green space at the center of a block, and you guys don't have alleys. And that gives you more density and it gives residents just a higher quality green space. Anyway, so that's how I got into writing and thinking about courtyard urbanism and just thinking about why that setup is so rare in US cities, why even in New York, they used to build it a lot in the pre-war period, now not so much. And what about it now? What about development now is creating development patterns that are not serving Americans well in cities. It's continuing this family exodus out of cities and what we can do to bring this kind of development back to cities.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. The thing that really stands out to me about the whole concept is just the green space that's available. Because especially even in New York, like, yes, there is a lot of wall-to-wall buildings, but at the end of the day, you're not really having access to a lot of green space. And I agree with you that that is what drives a lot of families out because I was even talking to my family, my parents, they live in the suburbs of Illinois, actually. And I
Oh,
was asking, yeah, and I was asking them why they don't, why they choose to live in the suburbs over a city. And I have a little brother, he's 11 years old, and they're like, he loves to run around, he loves the green space, he loves to do all this, like ride his bike. And we just feel that it would be so much easier for him to do that with the land rather than the city, even though, they like to go down to the city, eat out, have access to all these things and the wonders of a city. And I think that it's really important to note that the inside is not available for the public because it's so much safer. You can leave your kids, running out um, outside and not have to worry about it, not have to worry about strangers coming in. So I think it's a really interesting concept.
yeah, and they vary a lot over Europe. And like in Florence and in Prague and parts of Germany, a lot of these are like they were each of the because every building has its own backyard. And sometimes they're parceled off. And so you don't have a big backyard. But especially in the Scandinavian countries, it's more common for them to kind of open up the courtyard. And so I post some of these blocks, and it's like a park. It's like these people have a huge park as their backyard and they open
Hmm.
it up. And I hear a lot like, and I don't even post all of it because a lot of these people are, I mean, it's their private backyard. Or like, please don't share this on Twitter, but look at my
Hmm.
cool park in my backyard. And
Yeah.
these kids are just having a blast. And it's way more fun than a private backyard because in your private backyard, your kids can blow and they can go and they can have like their play set and whatever, but they don't have my kids, we've got a little city backyard. And it was
Hmm.
fine when they were babies and toddlers, and you can put it like a little kiddie pool out there. But then at a certain age, they want to go be with friends and
Yeah.
play with friends. And so I have to, take them to a play date and take them to the park until they're old enough to go by themselves, which
Hmm.
depending on, the maturity of the child and how safe the streets are in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
can be between like 8 and 12. And so there's a long time for parents where you're kind of like it's hard. It makes it a lot harder to have kids when you have to take them. And if you have the option of just sending your kid out to this safe backyard where they can meet with other neighbor kids and run around and have a blast and not make a mess in the house, that is such an amazing amenity. And it's one that's just was kind of passively formed by really good urban planning in the
Hmm.
late 19th century. I totally get the pull the suburbs, and I get like you can have these suburban cul-de-sac situations where kids can
Hmm.
ride bikes. And like there are very few city neighborhoods where you get this critical mass of kids and the slow streets where they can have that kind of normal childhood experience. And the city neighborhoods where that exists, like the housing prices are so high that it's hard to justify buying housing there. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's like, well, clearly we need to increase the supply of these neighborhoods where there's
Right.
this family-oriented housing and slow streets.
Yeah.
And because that's people, yeah, they want the urban amenities, but they need a safe environment to raise children.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess with that, I'm wondering, in your opinion, what do you think are the cities that are doing it right?
Hmm. Well, that is a really good question. I don't. I think that there are cities in Europe that are doing a really good
Hmm.
job. I don't have really good examples in this continent right now, although
Hmm.
there's a lot of things in works. I think in like 5, 10 years, I'll be like, oh, in this project, in this project, this project.
Yeah.
But what's Stockholm? Stockholm is such an amazing city. I post a lot about it, and they're doing what a lot of these cities used to do before the war, and that's just like lay street grids, and then create parcels so that developers can go in and build it out. It's not like in the US, the way that cities do, they get developers to do these elaborate master plans for these kind of
Hmm.
one-off buildings. And then there's this huge mega development, and then the community freaks out because it's like this, 500 or 700 units in these really tall buildings, and everybody hates them. And then there's this big back and
Yeah.
forth with the developer and the community. And in Stockholm, it's just like, here's a grid. Here, you have to keep it, kind of make it match the surrounding grid, and then do what you want. And they are building stuff that basically matches what they were doing 200 or 100 years ago, but it's nicer and it's newer, but it's like the same kind of courtyard blocks of small multifamilies built wall to wall. But they're expanding it and they're nicer. They're often larger units because people want more space now than they did 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And they're, there's just like nicer urban technologies and they're connected by the metro and stuff. Copenhagen, what's interesting with the
Yep.
courtyard blocks in Copenhagen, and so they had all these courtyards, and then, with the rise of Europe has automobiles too, and in the rise of the automobile in the 20th century, a lot of these courtyards were converted to parking lots because everybody was excited about cars. And then there was this gradual realization that the cars make the cities worse
Hmm.
because the traffic danger, the pollution. And then since the 90s, there's kind of like been a city private partnership with the residents of courtyard blocks to green the courtyards. And so they've got this program where different blocks are using public funds and some private funds to convert these parking lots back into green courtyards. And that has really increased the amount of family-friendly housing and livability. And so there's like this economic index that every year gives an award to a city in the world or ranks the cities for livability. And it's been Vienna for many years. And then
Hmm.
Copenhagen recently stole it this year because it's just by all these like environmental and education and housing for all these different measures. It has won, and a lot of it has been increasing the supply of family-friendly housing. But in the United States, like the thing that I'm really excited about is, have you heard about this California Forever project?
I have not, no.
This is really interesting.
Hmm.
So
California.
there's a housing affordability crisis everywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the worst in California. They
Yeah.
are not building anything in California. The housing prices are terrible. And the Silicon Valley money has for many years been trying to figure out who among a number of people who have their hat in the ring are actually serious about building a new city. A lot of people
Hmm.
have been talking about building a new city, and they finally decided that a gentleman whose name is Jan Sramek, he's a Czech national,
Hmm.
that his plan is the most likely to succeed. And so he's acquired, it's a bunch of land that is north of San Francisco and south um, of Sacramento. And most of
Okay.
it's currently like an old wind farm, and
Yeah.
it's part of this Suisun city, and it's a really neat location. But anyway, he's going to do a new city. He and I have been talking. He's going to do courtyard blocks. It's going to be like a very walkable, traditional city, but also very high tech. And he's going to have a lot of high tech manufacturing, and it's just like a really, really interesting city. Right now, it's going through environmental review, which, as you can imagine, is going to be
Hmm.
challenging in California. But
Yeah.
that's something to watch because if he succeeds and it's as cool as the plans are, which I've seen and they look amazing, it's going to set a new standard for urbanism in the United States, and cities everywhere are going to you're going to be able to go and be like, look, he did this kind of block in
Yep.
California. Why can't we do a neighborhood like this in
Right.
Atlanta or in, the Bronx or in Brooklyn or wherever?
Yeah. You said it's called California Forever?
That's the name. If you Google
California.
California Forever, that's the name of the
Uh-huh.
company. And he's the founder, CEO, Jan, Jan Sramek,
Hmm.
Sramek. And then they're originally going to just do a new charter city. And then they found out it was going to be easier for them to go do an expansion of an existing small
Hmm.
city called Suisun City, and it is
Suicide City.
right on water. There's already an existing like shipyard there. It's a really cool
Hmm.
location, and they're hoping to make it like a kind of answer to the Shenzhen area in China, like bring a lot of high-tech manufacturing and workshops and makers, but also do really like fine-grained human scale urbanism that's very walkable and with courtyard blocks and row homes and like
Yeah.
drawing on kind of the best neighborhoods of your tradition pre-war European cities and like Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could absolutely set a precedent as well. because like you said, I mean, if the proof is there, if it executes successfully and people end up actually moving out there, loving it, forming a community, being able to raise family while also making it more affordable, I think that can 100% be used as an example for other cities because I mean, there's nothing, that vastly different about California that can't be replicated because at the end of the day, it's how the cities plan. And with Copenhagen, I think it is Scandinavia doing an amazing job because I was in Copenhagen last summer, this summer, I guess. And I have like when we were talking about courtyards, I was thinking about like when have I seen like a real courtyard in person? And my first thought that came to my mind was in Copenhagen because I remember being like in a garden, um, and it was like a very nice garden in the backyard. There was so much space and I remember like looking up and seeing people like watching like us walking through like from their balconies. I was like, whoa, that's really interesting. Like, um, yeah. And now I'm starting to think about it, and I think it's just very fascinating idea.
A, a lot of people, when they travel in Europe, they don't realize, I mean, they're in this charming street and they're going through like one of these traditional mixed-use streets where there's commercial on the bottom and residences on the top, and they don't realize that on the other side of the building mass is a green
Mhm.
courtyard. And a
Yeah,
lot of the buildings that's just they don't in America we have these really really thick long buildings that kind of take up the whole block, but in Europe
Mhm.
they not all of them, but they tend to have thinner buildings that are only a unit deep. And what's great about that is that the units, these, multifamily units, as I always say, they live like a house because you can have a window wall that's facing the public street, and then you can have a window wall that's facing
Exactly.
a private courtyard. So you can have like a public side of the house and you can have a quiet side of the house. And and it's really it's different. It's different than how a lot of, I mean, we have some pre-war buildings like that, but it's part of the reason why I think that apartment living or condo living is more popular in Europe is that they just have better quality multifamily building. And as the US urbanizes, as more people want to live in the city because they want to be close to like the cultural and the economic networks, they want to be in a walkable neighborhood, we have to figure out how to do better multifamily because you can't have a walkable neighborhood of single family homes. It doesn't
Yeah.
work.
No, yeah, 100%. So I guess my question to you is that I've seen you address this before, and people will make the argument that, well, why do families want to live in cities? Because, a lot of the time cities are for young people or it's deemed that way. So what do you think are the benefits of having families be able to live in the city?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are so many ways to answer this. And
Hmm.
like, I mean, for one, if you're just thinking about the parents and what they are doing, and it's, the cities are where the good jobs are.
Yeah,
And so for often if you want access to the good jobs, it is more advantageous for you to be close to the jobs. And that means it's much easier if you can get on a train and have a working commute that's 30 minutes and you can get email or read on the train rather than being an hour sitting in a
yeah,
car in traffic from the suburbs. And so there's access to the jobs. And then there's access to like the social network. And one thing, and there's social just like the friends, but there's also family. One thing that struck me when I was living in Florence was that the family that I was living with, they had living in the same city. It was like the grandpa both sets of grandparents, all the aunts and uncles, and just this vast family network. I grew
hmm
up in suburban Michigan with,
hmm
grandparents in Florida, grandparents in Indiana, aunts and uncles all over the United States, cousins all over. I grew up hardly knowing that. I mean, we would see them a couple times a year, but I never had a close relationship with my extended family. And I was just like floored by how connected these family ties were in Florence, and how beneficial it was for the parents because they had all this support from the grandparents and from the aunts and uncles. And then, of course, they were able to help the aging grandparents too. And that was very just beneficial for the family. And it was all enabled by the fact that they lived within, a 20-minute walk of each other.
Yep.
And then there's and just like the friend networks, it's nice to be able to walk and get coffee or a drink
Hmm.
with friends and not have to, as I say, commute to community. You don't, where we're in the suburbs, you
Right.
have to commute
Yeah.
to your community, which is ridiculous. But then there's this whole, so I've got three kids, and my eldest now is 10, and I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And there's this whole set of benefits that come from raising children in a walkable, dense community. And it's harder. I feel like it's harder at first because when they're little in the city, you're kind of trapped because you can't let them outside because of the street and the traffic and the danger. But
Hmm.
once they're old enough to be trusted to cross streets safely, they can walk themselves to school. They can walk themselves to their
Yep.
friend's house. My daughter walks herself to her volleyball practice, and you don't have to do the whole, mom chauffeur game where you're just spending
Hmm.
all of your time driving your kids to their activities. And that's a huge quality of life bump. But there's also a lot to be said about, there's these concerns about helicopter parenting. And I feel like helicopter parenting is, in a way, this rational response that many parents have to the danger that's posed by streets and these kind of dangerous suburban environments. And in the city, if you're in a nice, slow street, narrow street neighborhood, kids can safely get themselves around their own activities, and they can enjoy a degree of autonomy and agency that I never had growing up in suburban
Yep.
Michigan. Like I depended on my parents to drive me to all my
Yep.
activities, and it was awful. I remember being 14 and going crazy because we
Yeah.
lived way out, and I was just like, I had three younger sisters, and we were all trying to compete with the parents to drive us places, and it was misery. And then, you're waiting until you're 15 so you can get your driver's
Yeah.
license. And then when you get a car, then you have to spend all your weekends working your weekend jobs so you can have enough money to pay for the car and the
Yeah.
gas. And it's just a terrible way to be a kid. And
Yeah.
I see these teenagers in the city, and they're like taking the train and they're walking into their friends' houses, and they're having this amazing like like this adolescence that is so healthy and so just normal. Well, it used to be normal and it should be normal,
Yeah.
but it's not anymore. And I think that anyway, just like so in some, there's benefits for the parents, for just like, all the family, the multi-generations of the family, but also for the kids in a kind of childhood development and adolescent development perspective.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. I remember so clearly, like from the ages of 13 to 16, maybe, just thinking like, oh my God, like when am I going to get a license? When am I going to get a license? Because I mean, if my parents were working, I mean, how could I get anywhere? I mean, there's no way I could walk or bike. I mean, it'd have to be miles, right? And if you want to hang out with your friends on like a weekday, it's just, I mean, yeah, you have to either bike or you have to wait for your parents to come home, which is just, super frustrating. And having a car is like very inconvenient. There's the gas aspect. I mean, now it's a little better, with electric vehicles and whatnot, but there's a gas aspect. There's
And
just a
it's
lot to worry
expensive.
about. Yeah, 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 it is. It's just expensive. The insurance, when you're first getting your license is crazy high, like for teenagers. So I think that if I was able to, live in a city when I was growing up, I would have had way better access to the things that I wanted to and, just less stress in general. And I thought it was interesting, like you said, your daughter even walks herself to volleyball practice. That's, I mean, developing that sense of autonomy, like at such a young age, is going to position her so much better for later on in life, like psychologically, because she's not overly reliant on her parents or whatnot.
No, I know. And
Yeah.
I hear people remark on that, like when I'll have, cousins come and visit us, and the 10-year-old is like taking them around the neighborhood, and they're just struck because she knows how to get around. She knows how to, like, I don't let her take the train yet herself. We're off the Brown line, which is
Mhm.
relatively safe. I know families that let their middle schoolers, beginning of middle school, take the train. But she knows how to get around, and when she's in middle school, she'll be able to take the train likely. Um,
Mhm.
and and people are really struck by the maturity and the agency and Yeah, just how no, it's not like they're grown. I mean, they're still children. And it's not like she's growing up too fast, but she just
Right.
really is independent in many but in a nice, like I think developmentally appropriate way. And it's good for her. She likes taking herself to places. She likes meeting her friends at the bottle shop to go and get a soda and a candy.
Hmm.
And it's good for me because I don't have to like have the skill trip of like, oh, I need to get this done, but I also need to go and do this thing so she can have this social life. Like she can do her social activity herself and not rely on me to do it.
Yeah. And then one other thing that I want to point out too about all of this is that I think there's a large economic benefit from having families live in the city, because at the end of the day, families are usually going to be the highest income earners. They're going to have the most, sense of disposable income. So for local businesses to grow and, for schools to have the proper funding that they need to in order to have their students be successful later on in life, I think that families have a huge economic driver in that.
Yes. I would love to see numbers on this. I'm sure there's been research on it, but when I think of just the money that goes into piano lessons and swim lessons
Yeah.
and just like the outlay on all like the
Yep.
never-ending clothing. I mean, I feel like the families with kids are just floating the local economy. And what's also for local businesses, it's also, you know, the parents or the caregivers are out at times when other people are not. So like if we go to our little economic center in our neighborhood right now, it's going to be a lot of parents out with little kids at 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. And it's not, later after work, you'll get a different set. But it's the families are often out and about out during the day when other people are in the office. And so they
Hmm.
provide those eyes on the street and just activate the public street during the day in a nice way. And yeah, for school, it's so necessary for school enrollment. And it's been a big problem. I know I've talked about this a lot, but there's been some really good reporting on the shocking declines in the percent of children under 18 that are living in the major cities. And like, so since 2020, the percent of children under 18 in like the major metros has dropped double digits. Like in New York City, it's like 18% declines. In Chicago, it's 15. In LA, it's 15.
Hmm.
And this is mostly driven, I mean, some of it is just people are having fewer children and there's a decline in fertility. And so in most areas, there are declines. But there are some areas where, like, the exurbs are seeing an increase. The exurbs are where it's
Yeah.
actually cheaper to buy a large home right now.
Right.
And there are some areas like the suburban Texas is picking up a lot of these families. But what we're seeing is a lot of these middle income families are getting pushed out of the very expensive blue state cities that are not adding any family friendly housing, and they're getting pushed to suburban Dallas. And it is bad for these cities economically, demographically, and it's just going to kill their school systems. Like
Yeah.
CPS, Chicago Public Schools, is down 100,000 since
Wow.
2010. And yes, and the teachers union is all like, we need to increase property taxes to like pay for these schools that are at like 15% enrollment. And meanwhile, like everybody who's realistic about it, like we need to close these schools, they're only at
Yeah.
15% enrollment. And it's like we need to, this is, I think the ideal situation is we grow our way out of this problem. We need to
Hmm.
add more housing. We need to get more families in the city. We're adding all these, it's good to affordable housing is good. It is good to add all this affordable housing. But right now every new development is a tower with a bunch of studios and one bedrooms. That's not
Yeah.
bringing middle class families in the city. And you need to be right now, the city should be prioritizing middle class families because otherwise you're not going to have a school system because all the
Yeah.
families are moving to Texas. And so
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of confusion from the part of the leaders, the city leaders about um, the importance of these families and really how the role that housing and development plays in making it possible for more families to stay in the city.
Yeah. I think that it's a huge problem in New York, and I'm sure that it is in many other cities. But I think it started off with people moving out from Manhattan to maybe, some of the other boroughs. And now at this point, it's like people are moving to New Jersey or, I mean, completely out of the city because it's just become the rent in New York has increased by such a substantial amount. I think now, Angela, I think you can chime in on this. It was the one bedroom in Astoria is going for how much?
Yeah, right down the block from me was going for around 3.5 for a one bedroom.
Yeah.
Oh.
In
Ridiculous.
Astoria, it's insane. And it just keeps going up. Like
And
there,
I
it's yeah.
I think that's there's actually something to be said for that regarding land value. Now I know you mentioned California with the new city that's being constructed or in the plans to be constructed.
Mhm.
In New York, property values and land values are already so high. So I wanted to ask how you envision maybe New York City or even developers really pushing through to make courtyard blocks when it's so expensive to acquire this property and when there's so many small landlords as well as larger property holders in these spaces already.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are there's land and it is oh the let's see like I think did we talk about the IBX?
Yes, yes, we did.
Yeah, so like there's a lot of land that the IBX is going to open up, and there's going to be a lot of conflict over how that gets developed. And I think that it would be really smart to go in for developers in the city to go in and say, like, we know that you guys do not want a bunch of, luxury high rises to go in here. Let's do some family friendly, small multifamily, similar to what is already like similar to the urban fabric that is already in Brooklyn. And so, like, I mean, the Courtyard blocks are basically it's similar to the blocks that are already in Brooklyn, but it's just the building footprint is a little bit wider and shallower and goes up maybe 4 or 5 stories because you're trying to get the floor area mass. The building mass is concentrated kind of thinner and taller around the perimeter instead of deeper and squatter, flatter. And that way you get more green area in the center of the block and just more of a more protected green area and more protected street too. Because these buildings, when they go up 4 or 5 stories or even taller, they can create a nice wall. And that could be, potentially a way for the city to appease and just mollify the homeowners and the communities in that area. Um, but whenever there is a large commercial parking lot, that could be a courtyard block. There's a big brouhaha right now over the Safeway in San Francisco. So San Francisco's in a similar situation. Extremely high prices, not a lot of land, and every scrap of land is getting fought over. And there's a Safeway that occupies basically a city block right by the marina. And a developer has made a plan for like a 700 unit high rise, and people are freaking out. And like they'll probably sometimes developers will go and make an initial bid of like, hey, here's a really, really big building, knowing that everybody's going to freak out, and then eventually we'll get like maybe 400 units, and if they start at 700, maybe they'll get 400, and that's probably what they're going to do here. But like it would be a lot less conflict and emotion and anger if the city just had a plan like they used to do. It'd be like, okay, so this is how every single courtyard block and development got developed in Europe back in the day. The city had a building code that said you have to build up to the property line. So that's like, where the lot meets the sidewalk. And if you want to build to the sides of the lot, then you have to build masonry because if you build wood, then it's a fire risk. And you can go up 5 stories and you can only build 50% of the lot.
Hmm.
And that the 50% is what created the courtyard because they couldn't fill it, they couldn't go all the way back. And so to make up the floor area, they had to go tall and kind of use the greater edge around the perimeter. And in the US, we never Like in that 50% or sometimes it's 40%. Like that's 50% is kind of like
Yeah,
the biggest, but it could be 30 to 40. In the US, we never, that came out of like concern about ventilation and sanitation. And in the US, we never really had that same concern in the cities, which is probably why so many people left for the suburbs as soon as they could, because it was so crowded. And then there wasn't a lot of green space in the
yeah,
city because we covered every inch of these lots. But I think that if you want to make city lots that are livable and that have the light, good light and ventilation and a patch of ground for little kids to run around in, then you need to limit developers on how much of the lot they can cover with building. And that can come from the city or it can come from a developer, but then they'll be losing money unless you can also come from a floor area ratio cap. And you say like, okay, you can have this is the floor area ratio, and you can meet it by then they can meet it by going up a certain level, up 5 stories. And, but it's hard because we don't have this tradition in the US. I think that as soon as, Yan does in California, or, there's some other projects that are brewing in Salt Lake City and elsewhere. I think as soon as we get some models, it'll be easier, but it's right now it's at a point where developers are like, oh, that's a cool idea, but how do I take this to my investors and be like, hey, give me money to do this totally unproven
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I think that the developers have just been so incentivized to build the luxury high rises with God knows how many units. And that's kind of like what we're trying to research and figure out, well, how can we incentivize the developers to, make something truly affordable and also something that's not going to completely destroy the infrastructure? Because when you place so many people at once in a city that's not ready for it, the school districts are overflowing, the businesses are not doing well because there's not enough small businesses to support that. So I mean, maybe, one or two of the small businesses are going to be doing well, but there's not enough of them for it to really have that economical boost that having such a large inflow of people should have. And we're going to talk about that in the Long Island City section because that's a prime example of the article that we're working on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And uh,
Can you tell me more? Give me more context for the Long Island city.
yeah, I'm going to try to be quick because the Zoom's going to cut us off in like a minute and a half.
Okay.
But yeah, but Long Island City essentially like 20, 30 years ago was a lot of machinery and kind of a whole lot of nothing. And then really quickly it shot up with just huge luxury skyrise towers like all throughout. And I was reading some statistics about the impacts that it's had, and it's extremely expensive to live out there compared to some of the other neighborhoods because only luxury buildings. There's they dedicated 20-30% to affordable units, but those affordable units have completely different sides of the parking garages. They have different entrances. It's not You're not really living in the building. And then the impacts on the economy are also not great. I saw that literally were having to relocate kids from schools because it was going to pop. They're having drainage issues, infrastructure issues, and
Hmm.
just couldn't support it. But yeah,
Well,
the Zoom is about to end. So
yeah, I
yeah,
see
next time
that.
hopefully we'll get the pro Zoom. I'll probably get that today. But thank you very much, Alicia. It's been a pleasure.
It was really fun talking to you guys. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to collaborating on this article and just going
Yes.
forward.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye.